Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is October 10th, 2014. We're hearing a lot in the news over the last few weeks and months about the new war developing in Syria. And we might wonder, why is this happening? What is the purpose of this war? How extensive will American involvement be? Well, I have a couple of clips to show you after a few minutes, which will try to give you a little bit of the opposing view, not the opposing view, but the view from the people of Syria through just ordinary citizens, one of whom is a journalist, and one of whom is apparently not a journalist, but just an audience member who really gave John McCain hell in a town meeting. Now, John McCain, as we know, has been connected with the Free Syria Front, the Al-Qaeda linked organization that is attempting to overthrow the Assad regime. Now, this is called, it's also been called ISIS. It's part of, these are linked groups, and there's many, of course, different groups fighting in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria, and in other countries in the Middle East. And certain of these groups are directly funded by NATO, by the United States, by Saudi Arabia, by Turkey, by other countries that have a direct interest in destabilizing and overthrowing certain secular regimes in the Middle East. And really, Syria is of course, the major focus right now of the Western powers and their running dog supporters, and the self-interested parties who are also Middle Eastern, like the criminal Saudi government, which would love to see more destabilization in the Middle East. Why is that? Why would Saudi Arabia? You have the tribal conflicts, of course, the Wahhabist out of Saudi Arabia that originally are major players and have been the focus of a lot of funding and training by the Western powers, and they're being used as a proxy army to destabilize country after country after country, and of course in the Mediterranean Rim as well, because many of these are the same mercenary international fighters that are guns for hire that overthrew the Gaddafi regime. And of course, we saw the Muslim Brotherhood. That's another major player. Now, a Syrian girl, who's the journalist we'll be seeing in a few minutes, mentions the Syrian Brotherhood. This is a very interesting clip I'm about to show you, because this was filmed about a year ago on Australian television. Now, Syrian girl is a Sunni, and she left Syria with her family a number of years ago, and has become a really kind of an important alternative voice for the Syrian people, because what you will hear from the Syrians is that they do not necessarily support Assad, but they do not support the alternative. And they consider the alternative, most of them, to be worse than Assad. Assad at least provided them with a secure country and demanded that national sovereignty be respected, has the loyalty of the military. And what the Syrian people don't like, of course, is the self-serving, the corruption, and the brutality that goes along with living under a dictator. And I think the issue, and Americans might say, well, he's a dictator. Why? It's the right thing to depose this dictator. This is the right thing to do. Because it's not democracy. And they completely forget, of course, that not every population in every country in the world is ready for living in a republic. Because a democracy itself is problematic, but a republic has the certain safeguards in place that will prevent the majority running roughshod over the minority, which is what can happen in a pure democracy. And this is, of course, something that Thomas Jefferson was very much aware of and warned against, another of the founders of the United States. That's why they made the United States not a pure democracy, but a republic. And we won't go into that today, but many people, including Americans, really have no understanding or very little understanding of what it means to live under the rule of law. A lot of Americans would just say, well, it's the right thing to do, and we should do it. Well, the right thing to do is not necessarily lawful. And bombing Syria is not lawful under American law, under international law. You have to take into account that there's gradations of, I could say, goodness. No one is lily white. No government is lily white on this planet. There are always difficulties and problems with people once they get in a situation in which they can hold power over other people. These are magnets for sociopaths and psychopaths that, in other words, dangerous characters are attracted to power, and they love to wield power over others. And so therefore there's just an inherent danger in giving over a certain amount of your freedom to someone voluntarily over you, because they can very easily exploit that power, and people often do. So what we have is just many different issues involved: political, social, financial, moral, religious, all bound up in a giant mix and swirling around in this maelstrom, in this whirlpool, in this vortex that's called the Middle East. And this has been going on for a very long time. And but the different players have the prize. They have the prize that they want. And Saudi Arabia, for instance, wants to hold on to its top dog status as the world's major oil supplier. Now, the Saudi monarchy, this criminal monarchy of thugs, knows that eventually the Saudi oil is going to run out. And they will, once they lose that, then they're going to be out of business. So they're looking at the other major oil-producing countries in the region, and they're thinking, if we cannot get that oil for ourselves, if we cannot own that oil, we can at least disrupt the production of that oil. We can make those countries so unstable, we can bomb those oil. The Saudis themselves can't do it, but they can participate in the destabilization of those countries. We can bomb the oil fields, we can bomb the refineries, we can bomb the pipelines, we can destroy the roads, the bridges, the infrastructure that allows the oil to get to market. That's one way to control the resources of the planet. and essentially get rid of your competition. And this is one way that, this is the way people operate. Major corporations, if they can get the military to help them, they're very, very often going to do it. These people are ruthless. So let's look at this very interesting clip with Syrian girl standing up for herself really strongly in a public forum in Australia on an Australian TV show. This is not something you'll see on American television, my friends. This is Australian television. You don't get to see this kind of open debate in America that often. So let's roll it.
Secular government, and I'm not a government supporter. I am for the reform process, just like the majority of the Syrian people. But the fact is,
let her
interrupt me, sir. The fact is, it is Americans and NATO governments and Israel that are funding these Al-Qaeda terrorists and Muslim Brotherhood extremists, and that is the point that everybody here is missing. And the fact is that, excuse me, sir, but you do have a stake in Syria, because we have Russia emerging as a superpower, and you have China emerging as a superpower, and America and NATO want to control the Mediterranean Sea. They want to cut off this new pipeline deal that is happening between Syria, Iraq, and Iran. To cut off ties between Syria and Iran, which is why these people hate Iran so much. And this is why these sectarians are against any unity between Syria and Iran, because they want to see Syria get destroyed. And that is what this is about, destroying Syria.
Mimi, what sort of government do you want?
Of course, I would like to see a government that has less corruption, but also maintains our foreign policy, which is of the utmost importance, because we have an imperialist Zionist entity right next door to us, Israel, which is funded by NATO, and the whole crisis is being created by our enemies, Israel, NATO, America.
Okay, can I just ask you though, do you want Assad to survive?
Right now, Assad has to survive because his replacement is going to be Islamic extremists, the Muslim Brotherhood,
but do you want him to survive?
I want him to survive for now.
But do you want him to run Syria?
I want him
is he the person you want running your country?
I want to run Syria eventually. Okay? So now I see that the fall of the Assad regime would be a disaster for my country.
Okay, final comment from you, Hanadi.
I just want to say we're not Assadi regime supporters. We are Syrians. Therefore, we've seen the uprising in the Middle East. We've seen that so-called Islamic Brotherhood uprising, and the proof is in Egypt. The leader now is a Brotherhood extremist. In Tunisia, the leader is a Brotherhood extremist. In where else? Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt. This is what concerns us. We've lived there. I've lived there for 8 years myself. Everybody practiced his religion freely. We've all had free education. We've had it all. What is it they want? I want a reform. We all want reforms. We do know every country has corruptions. We want that to go. However, we don't want extremists to come and run our country. That's all we're saying.
Okay, so this is pretty interesting stuff, I think, because You've got two Syrian nationals. The girl who was sitting on the right, the Syrian girl, the journalist, and I thought it was pretty funny when she said she herself would like to run Syria eventually. And I don't know if she was serious about that, but I suppose she might be serious. Think eventually that she might actually get into politics. Very, very dangerous and bold and brave of her to even consider getting into something, a situation like that would put her in harm's way. But they make some really interesting points, and the opposition there, those young men, those men who were sitting there with the ribbons around their neck that had the Syrian flag on them, they were FSA, that would be Free Syrian Army, and they are opposing the Assad regime. Now, the two women who were speaking, the two Syrian women, Syrian girl and the other woman, made it very clear that they did not support the Assad regime, but it was better than the alternative. So we have to take this into account. We have to understand that these are human beings and they're not monsters that need to be destroyed. And I think you'll hear a lot of that passion in the voice of another Syrian woman who's speaking to John McCain in this clip. Let's roll that clip.
At a recent town hall meeting in John McCain's home state of Arizona, the warmongering senator was a Syrian-American woman in attendance. We'll see that video in full in just a second. Implied in her argument here is that the track record of U.S. government lying to its citizens to gain consent for a war that then increases destruction, increases the amount of dead and displaced, increases the amount of children orphaned by a bloodthirsty and money-thirsty U.S. foreign policy, increases the amount of children in far-off lands that pose no threat to U.S. national security, whose lives will be ruined and who will grow up, understandably, statistically, significantly more inclined to fly a plane into a building or two. This is a view shared by a majority of Americans, but McCain can live with all that, really. What he can't live with, what really seemed to unnerve him, was the wise suggestion that we pressure Saudi Arabia and Iran, each with a vested interest in the Syrian civil war on opposite sides, and get them to back off to create space for peace.
Anyway, the point is right now, no one's denying there's a lot of atrocities being committed in Syria, whether on the rebel side or whether on the other side as well. The point is there is a good option to what could happen in Syria. For me to listen to you saying there is no good option, I refuse to believe that.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Don't you just love how McCain just faux listens to this woman and flips his hand in the air like, okay, I guess we're going to agree to disagree, lady. I mean, violence is really the answer, but who would not have cheered if that woman just took the microphone and the cord of the microphone and bashed McCain's skull in? I would have cheered. Then again, it's probably good that I did not have the microphone, because that woman took a breath, composed herself, and then took apart the senator with her words.
The good option right now is to take Saudi Arabia and Iran and force them to stop supporting the two sides in Syria. And you could do it. You can do it by diplomacy and negotiation, not bombs, Senator McCain. We cannot afford to shed more Syrian blood. Personally speaking, I have a cousin who is 18 years old, just was killed 10 days ago by the so-called rebels and Al-Qaeda, and they're not Syrian. They're coming to Syria from all over the world to fight this. We cannot afford to do that. We cannot afford to turn Syria into another Iraq or Afghanistan. I beg you. My family is there. There's so many good Syrians. The majority of the Syrian people want to save their country. And you need to also listen to the majority of the American people who do not want you to go there. This is not an issue that we could take so lightly, Senator McCain. Enough is enough. We do not want another engagement in the Middle East. We don't want Al-Qaeda to take over. We don't, whether you like Bashar al-Assad or not, I am not a fan either. But at least he has a secular government going on over there. It is secular, Senator McCain. We are a minority over there. We are the minority Christians who are, unfortunately, by you and so many in the Senate, are just considering us as collateral damages. And I refuse to believe that. I refuse that, because I could trace my family's name to the Bible. We were there prior, from the beginning of humanity, we were there. And we refuse to be forced to leave and flee and be considered a collateral damage.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your passionate plea. Thank you for your very compelling and emotional statement. And all I can tell you is that I too have been to Syria. I too know the people who are fighting there. I've met them, I know them, and I know who they are. And I know Syria well enough to know that it is a moderate nation. It is not a nation that will embrace these foreign fighters. But to say that Bashar Assad is anything but a merciless butcher, then we have a strong disagreement.
No, except, Senator McCain, you lie. The woman did not claim that Bashar al-Assad was a saint. She's claiming that U.S. intervention in Syria will escalate the situation in the region and beget more violence, beget more bloodshed and death. She argued that the choice being given to the American people, which is stand by and do nothing or dive into a civil war, is a false choice. She argues that we should pursue peace through diplomacy. Just as importantly, she brought up the role of the Saudis, who may very well be behind the chemical weapons attack in Damascus, and you haven't showed us any intelligence otherwise. We covered this on an Acronym TV segment on August 30th. Take a look. When Bush lied himself off into war, at least he was able to do so in a way that convinced a statistically significant portion of the population that war with Iraq was needed. According to recent polls, more people in the United States still believe Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11 than think that we should intervene with a military strike in Syria. Secretary of State John Kerry, making the case for military action, said last Monday that links between the attack and the Assad government are undeniable and that Assad's guilt was already judged clearly by the world. By Thursday, U.S. intelligence officials said linking Syrian President Bashar Assad or his inner circle to alleged chemical weapons attack was, quote, not a slam dunk, with questions remaining about who actually controls some of Syria's chemical weapons stores and doubts about whether Assad himself ordered the strike. Reporters dutifully filed reports that John Kerry was making untrue statements, but let me clarify it for you. John Kerry, in the great American tradition, looked the people of the United States and the global community in the eye, and he lied. What we would have called under the Bush administration a Straussian lie, a lie in pursuit of, at least in Kerry's warped skull, a greater truth. And by Friday, a much bigger bombshell, if you will pardon the pun, in an exclusive report for Mint Press News, interviews with Syrians on the site of the chemical attacks seem to point to a direct involvement with the Saudis providing the chemical weapons for the attack. Certain rebels received chemical weapons via the Saudi intelligence chief Prince Bandar bin Sultan and were responsible for carrying out the gas attack. That's the thesis put forward by reporters Dale Gavlak and Yahya Abadne. The report quotes the rebels themselves. Quote, "They didn't tell us what these arms were or how to use them," complained a female fighter named Kay. "We didn't know they were chemical weapons. We never imagined they were chemical weapons. When Saudi Prince Bandar gives such weapons to people, he must give them to those who know how to handle and use them," she said. She, like other Syrians, did not want to use their full names for fear of retribution. The article goes on to say that many observers believe Bandar, with his close ties to Washington, has been at the very heart of the push for war by the United States against Assad. Indeed, that he has been involved in the 2.5-year-long civil war in Syria. Interesting, a Saudi connection to a tragic event that precipitates U.S. involvement in a war. When was the last time that happened, and how did that war go?
That was interesting, and we have to take into account that a year has passed since this video was made, and indeed now the war that John Kerry was the spokesman for, the major cheerleader for, now is developing, and it's just starting up, really, just getting started. It will be a very long conflict, probably, and already there are calls for boots on the ground in Syria, American troops to be involved yet again in the Middle East. And one has to wonder, what were they thinking when they thought that they could do any good just from bombing? I mean, if bombing was effective, then back in the Vietnam War, they would have been able to bomb North Vietnam into submission. They certainly tried their damnedest, but they failed. And that's because what you do is, when you bomb a people, you turn everybody against you. People go underground. They're very good at digging, and they dig underground and they go underground every time an airplane shows up overhead. And their resolve is toughened, their loyalty to their leadership is strengthened, they become more determined than ever to survive. And like happened in the Vietnam War in North Vietnam, the Americans would bomb a bridge, and by the next day it would be rebuilt. Or they would bomb a road, the road would be rebuilt. You know, if they killed leadership, then new leaders step in to take their place. This is the way the human nature tends to work, and people do not respond well to violence. What people would prefer is conversation, is diplomacy, is deal making even, and this is the proper and civilized way of settling disputes between countries, between individuals, and all around the world. But the U.S. government and NATO consistently believes and attempts simply to use violence to bomb and kill their way to peace. We had the quote, the infamous declaration by Obama not that long ago, when he was announcing that the airstrikes would begin in Syria and Iraq again, a couple of weeks ago, that he would declare war on war and impose peace upon peace, whatever that means. But to declare war on war is a very Orwellian and frightening concept. It reminds me of some of the notorious statements that politicians have made in the past, like, you know, Wilson saying that World War I would be the war to end war. Well, this is just not the way things work. But some people never learn, and they believe their leadership, and they don't understand that leaders, when they're trying to get in office, will say anything at all. They will lie across the board about every subject if they think that this will allow them to take the reins of power. People, of course, more and more are unwilling even to accept the reality of the nature of leadership and sociopathic ambition, and they will continue to put their faith in very unreliable leadership. We now are in a situation in this country, and just like the situation has been in many, many other countries. I really thought this would probably never happen, but we're now looking at a situation in the United States in which you have almost a virtual complete lock on the ability of the American people to change the situation through democratic means. I never thought that in my lifetime I would see this, but it is so locked down, the gerrymandering, just all the way from the lower levels of government up to the very highest levels of government. Elections are meaningless. As some of the alternative journalists have pointed out, they're all criminals. Next week I'll continue on with this this idea that the world seems to be coalescing. The criminal element seems to be coalescing, working together on very high levels. They're already ignoring their rivalries that have kept them fighting with each other for the most part. I mean, ultimately, their own ambition will be their undoing. And but the problem is, what will happen to the ordinary, decent little people of the world while these behemoths, these juggernauts, vie for control? What happens is they work together for a while in order to get rid of the smaller people, the smaller threats to their power, and then ultimately they turn on each other and it becomes very cannibalistic. And you know what they say, there's no honor among thieves. So in the Middle East, we have a very, very dangerous game being played. You have NATO and the United States now bombing in Iraq and in Syria. And who are they bombing? They're supposed to be, they're pretending, they're saying that they're bombing ISIS, which is an Al-Qaeda group of ambitious young men drawn from all over the world, many of them just mercenaries, and whether or not they're trying to feed their families or they're adventurers, and there are some ideologues in there too. And there's just plain old psychopaths who like to kill in there too. You can be guaranteed of that, and like to torture and exploit. And they love war because once you get in a war situation, you take over a town, then there's no rule of law, and you can have your way with the civilians, with the, whatever you're into, whether it be women or children or young men or boys, whatever. They can fulfill their sick lusts, their sick appetites, and this is just the reality, horrifying reality. It becomes mob rule and rampant criminality. ISIS, of course, has been trained, armed, and filled with this dream that they're going to be able to use force to establish a utopia, a Muslim utopia. And now they have the American weapons, because most of the weapons that they're using are American. They were shipped over from Libya after the fall of Gaddafi, some of them. The Saudis, through their various subsidiaries, have supplied them with weapons. The Jordanians, and these are wealthy, I'm not talking about the ordinary Jordanian people, the Saudi people, but the people at the very top, the people who have the weapons, who have the money, the wherewithal to get the weapons. And maybe a lot of these Saudis actually bought the weapons from the United States. Remember, the United States is the weapons manufacturer and distributor of weapons to the world, for the most part, followed a distant second and third by Italy and Russia and China and different countries like that. They are trying to carve out a section of the Middle East for themselves, and that includes part of Syria and Iraq. Meanwhile, Turkey is standing right at the edge of this conflict, And they're seeing ISIS battling the Kurdish people who are scattered all through this part of the Middle East, in Turkey, in Iraq, in Syria. And the Kurds, of course, have their own agenda. They want their own national sovereign country, Kurdistan, which at this point does not exist. But in the northern part of Iraq, they have a certain amount of autonomy, and they were on their way to getting their own country. Now ISIS is threatening this, and they're fighting against ISIS. And you would think, okay, well, the Western powers should be against ISIS in this case. Not necessarily. Turkey is a NATO member, and Turkey has had a long-standing dispute with the Kurds. And why is that? Because part of the Kurdistan that the Kurds want to make is actually in Turkey. So they would like to carve out a piece of Turkey for themselves because that's where they live. That's where this ethnic minority, the Kurds, have lived for a very long time. They feel that they're oppressed and made into second-class citizens and robbed and exploited by the main Turkish people. And this is true. As so often happens, an ethnic group is used, because they're weak, they're being robbed and exploited and so on. So Turkey's refusing to help the Kurds against ISIS, even though Turkey is supposed to be against ISIS. But they're using ISIS to fight the Kurds. And amazingly, I heard this on the news today. It's very possible, and it's likely, that Turkey is hoping that ISIS will destroy the Kurds as much as possible, or degrade their ability to fight and weaken them, and that will be for Turkey one enemy that they can write off, you know, as a threat to them. And so they're going to let ISIS do their work for them. And their idea is that, well, we'll let ISIS take over, and then we'll deal with ISIS later. Now, the United States is in some ways a similar situation. They don't have anything against the Kurds. At least I don't think that they have anything against the Kurds, but they're looking at their geopolitical strategy for the 21st century, and in that game plan is the destruction of Syria. And as Syrian Girl and other Syrian nationals, alternative journalists have pointed out, they would like to break Syria into 3 separate countries. This would be one piece for the Kurds, one piece for Assad, and then one piece for, I guess, ISIS. And because what would that do? That would break the power of Assad and eventually get Assad out of there. And they're seeing that as the strategy now, at least for the moment. So although the United States is telling its people that it is against ISIS, it is really not against ISIS. It's really against Assad, and it's hoping that it can use ISIS to depose Assad regime and break Syria up, because it wants Syria to lose its sovereignty as an independent country. And this, of course, as I've mentioned before, has a lot to do with Russia, because Russia is an ally of Syria, and Russia needs Syria as an ally in order to allow it to have access to direct access for a pipeline to the Mediterranean Sea. And I think Syrian Girl pointed this out. And so the West wants to deny them Russia as the access. Again, it's a struggle for world power. The 2 empires. Putin is very ambitious, and he wants to restore the old empire that existed under the Soviet Union. And this is why he acted in Ukraine to try to prevent the move, the very clever strategy of the West to deprive him of of being able to claim Ukraine as an ally of Russia. That is why the Western powers funded the opposition to such an extent in the Ukraine that they were able to overthrow the elected president, which were admittedly criminals and corrupt, and then replace it with another equally corrupt regime, but one which owed allegiance to the hand that fed it, which would be the EU, NATO, America, rather than Russia. So they were hoping to tip the scales in the favor of the West and give the West a win in this struggle for power between the two big empires. And what we saw instead was that the Russian-speaking people on the eastern half of Ukraine rose up with the help of Russia, apparently, to defy the Ukrainian government and prevent them from taking control of that part of the country. So each of the two sides got a partial win, and the two proxy armies are now basically battling it out, or were until recently, in Ukraine. I guess they have some kind of a ceasefire going on. I'm not sure how well that's holding in Ukraine. We haven't heard anything in the last couple of weeks about Ukraine. We probably will soon as new developments are fed to us. But these are just ongoing problems. They're not going to be going away soon. But I think it's really important to understand that oftentimes it's just better not to act and to do nothing and let the events play out. And this is what a lot of the American people are really getting a handle on now. And of course our leadership calls it isolationism, but it's not isolationism, it's common sense. Because if you can't make a situation better and you just make it worse, why do it? But the question is, of course, that although you're making the situation worse for us, for the American people, and the people of the world, the ordinary people, there is a very small group of people at the top, people who are running multinational corporations, who thrive on war and conflict, who stand to gain from continuing conflict. And then, of course, you have the ideologues like the neocons and the neoliberals who believe that for the 21st century, America needs, and the West, NATO, EU, need to hold on to its empire and overcome all the other empires. And they're trying to deal with a resurgent Russia. And down the road, we can probably be pretty sure that there's going to be an eventual confrontation with China. But they're not willing to do that right now. China owns too much debt, the United States. China is too powerful. China is working behind the scenes to gain access to those natural resources in a way that the Western powers seem unable to do. And they're simply making deals. They're in Africa. They're in various countries around the world making deals. And what are these deals? They're actually doing business. And they're saying, look, we'll build this bridge for you. We'll build this road for you. We'll strengthen your infrastructure. But we need access to these rare earths, to these minerals. I was just hearing on the news today on the radio, I think it was NPR, there was I guess it was a CEO of a rare earth mineral company, a company that deals with this. And he was saying that a lot of the green people, the environmentalists, they say, look, we've got to get to solar power, wind power, electric cars, all this stuff, and get off the fossil fuels. He said what these people forget is that all of these electronic gadgets, these computerized, highly sophisticated electronic inventions that are being used more and more, require these rare earths. And I'm not even sure what rare earths are, but they require mining, he said. And the environmentalists are against mining. And he said, but you can't get them unless you mine. So we've got to allow that type of mining. And, well, so there it is. You know, the environmentalists are having to compromise. They're not getting necessarily what they want, which is to getting away from tearing up the earth to get these resources. And I would posit, I would suggest that there some sort of third alternative be arrived at. You know, human ingenuity is capable of coming up with a solution. Any kind of problem has a solution somewhere if you're willing to actually do the work to find that solution. So there is a solution out there, and I think somebody like Nikola Tesla probably maybe have come up with a solution about 100 years ago, but his radical technology, which was basically one of his technologies, was to use the energy of the magnetic field of the earth to run all of the machines, you know, the transportation and heating, lighting, etc. And he has apparently come up with a solution. Now, it's possible that the U.S. government has that technology, but for whatever reason has sort of deep-sixed that until the time would be right for them to trot out this advanced technology. Tesla was working on resonance, and there's a story that Tesla built a little box and he put it as an experiment on the girder of a skyscraper that was going up, I think in New York City, and he just attached it and it started a pulse. It started a resonance. And he started to get that entire building to resonate. And I guess there were people working on the building and they were wondering what's going on. And he had to remove it because he realized that if he allowed that resonator, if that to continue, because it was getting more and more powerful, that ultimately he would actually shake that whole skyscraper apart that was being built. And of course he didn't want to do that. So he had a potential extremely powerful tool there, using the resonance of the earth itself, of the powerful magnetic forces that really sustain life on planet Earth. If it were not that Earth has this envelope around it of an enormous magnetic field, which is polarized, just like a magnet, then the sun's very powerful solar wind and plasma, the superheated plasma that's constantly shooting out of the sun, that's deflected by the magnetic field around the Earth. If that were gone, then the Earth would be incinerated almost instantly, and all life would be extinguished on planet Earth. That's how powerful the forces are, the solar forces we're dealing with. People don't seem to understand that the sun is only 93 million miles away. I was talking to someone the other day who thought that the sun was several light years away, and he really needed to learn more about the solar system is completely wrong on that. That idea that the sun is that far away. The sun is really quite close. The sunlight, I think, takes about 12 minutes from the moment that it leaves the sun till it reaches Earth. And because the light goes at 186,000 miles per second, I believe that's the speed of light. So the universal forces could be tapped into either directly or indirectly. I mean, the tides happen as a result of the pull between the Earth and the Moon. So just that alone is extremely powerful. And people have this idea that human beings are changing the planet in radical ways. And I think that's just not the case. Human beings are not able to have the power to change the planet. I mean, we have polluted streams, we have polluted air, we have polluted oceans, we have polluted land in many places. Many places that are not that polluted. This is something we could deal with, we could change, we could stop polluting, if we wanted to. But as far as actually changing the makeup, the entire makeup of the Earth, like having an effect on the climate, like having it as a whole. Now, my understanding is that the technology to change weather is available. You can make it rain. You can make it stop raining. You can make a hurricane worse. You can break apart a hurricane. You can steer a hurricane. They have that kind of technology. The HAARP technology, which is apparently a very powerful weapon. That's a weapon that a lot of countries are working on, and they're developing ways to make a bulge in the magnetic field, the stratosphere, and you could use that power to direct an energy beam through the atmosphere to destroy an enemy. Unfortunately, a lot of these technologies that are being developed are secret, and they're being used for military purposes to extend the power of the various empires. Like basically, we have three major empires: the Anglo-American Empire, the Russian Empire, which is growing, and the Chinese Empire, which is also growing. And really, I think the Anglo-American Empire is gradually winding down. And I don't know if I'll see it in my lifetime, but what I would like to see in the United States is that you have a much more mature country, of people who are settled and stable and want to maintain what they have and value the space that they have, in other words, understand that there are no new frontiers, that they're stuck here where they are, they're not going anywhere, and so they might as well build a permanent civilization rather than a temporary civilization. Much of the building that we see in the United States is basically temporary buildings. And the lifespan of a new building is maybe 20 to 50 years. They're not building for creating a permanent structure. And that's what we need to see more of. That would change the mindset of the typical American citizen, I think, because they would say that they would begin to realize that we have to get along. We don't have an option. We can't opt out and just say, well, I'm just going to move. Because New Horizons, this is the American mindset. If you go to other countries, it's really not that way. The Japanese know they're not going anywhere, and they can't destroy their country. Unfortunately, not everyone in Japan seems to understand that. Tragically, those people will not be able to get that land back around Fukushima. That is gone. But what you had was, when that tragic combination of tsunami and then multiple meltdown happened, so you have this giant dead zone in a very crowded and really small country. What happened was that the Japanese people rose up as a body almost and demanded that nuclear power be shut down in Japan. And so the Japanese people were literally turning off their air conditioning and suffering and sweltering through with fans or, I don't know, nothing. And they had to live with that. And there are efforts now to start up one of those or a couple of those shut down nuclear power plants, and people are resisting it in Japan because they know they're not going anywhere, and the little piece of land that they have, their island, it's precious for those people. It's just an awful thing. I mean, that radiation has not just stayed within the boundaries of the dead zone, it's permanent, and it is permanent, virtually permanent dead zone. It has not just stayed in that dead zone. It has blanketed that country, and we don't get that information over here very much, but people over there know it. That's why the popularity of the Geiger counter in Japan, people were making their own Geiger counters. They couldn't even get them. You go to the grocery store, this is my understanding, I haven't been there, and some people have literally Geiger counters. They're checking out the food in the grocery store. So I don't know how I got onto that subject, but it's a very sad situation over there. But nevertheless, people will go on no matter what, and despite whatever hardships they have that face them in life. So that's all there is to this week. Have a great weekend and sleep well, friends.